welcome to tonight's edition of Face the Nation. We're coming to you live from our Stein Studio Complex here in Ratmalana. I'm Sonali Wanigapatage. It's good to be back after a short hiatus. Just to recap the political drama unfolding before us, yesterday saw the inaugural SLPP National Convention. Its leader Mahinda Rajapaksa announced Gotabaya Rajapaksa as its presidential candidate. Meanwhile, Badulla welcomed Deputy Leader of the UNP Sajid Premadasa at a mass public rally attended by several UNPers and the general public. However, the United National Party is yet to make a formal announcement as to who its presidential candidate will be. Meanwhile, the Janatha Vimukti Peramuna is set to make its nomination on the 18th of this month. So lots to look forward to. But is the next presidential election supposed to be a panacea for all ills? We'll find out. Very quickly, let me introduce our panel of journalists this evening. We're joined by Deshan Gonavala as well as Shehan Ranatunga. Good evening.
Good evening.
Our guests this evening are quite vociferous, some of them also poetic. Malinda Seniviratna, senior journalist, a very common face on our network as well. Good evening and welcome to you. Mr. Lasil De Silva, formerly a director admin at the Sri Lanka Parliament and also former secretary of Presifac, the Presidential Commission of Inquiry. Finally, Mr. Shamindra Ferdinando, news editor of The Island, a very vociferous critic as well. Good evening, gentlemen, and thank you for being on tonight's show. Malinda, my first question is to you. The relationship between a president and its people is supposed to be one of a social contract where the people hand over some of their powers to the president to govern the country in the best interests of the people. How must we now ensure that we learn from the mistakes that have been made thus far and progress in terms of a country, in terms of a people, towards a better Sri Lanka?
The social contract, Sonali, is essentially between the people and the state. In terms of elections, yes, we elect someone to represent us, and we hope that he or she represents us well. You know, but his representation speaks about our issues, resolves our problems. You know, and in terms of the country, ensures that the constitution is upheld, the borders are secure, food security, national security, all that is in order, and we have a healthy, wealthy citizenry. Right? Now, in this country, over the last 70 years, we have seen some progress in certain areas and a lot of disasters which have come about because people who we elected did not represent us, but they represented their own personal interests, and there has been a failure here. So the question that you are asking is how do we ensure that this does not happen? In any system, abuses are mitigated by checks and balances. If we don't have the proper checks and balances, then we can expect abuse. And we have a political culture of, in addition to a flawed system of governance, a political culture where people make promises and then they are all forgotten the day after the elections. You know, Mangala Samaravira once famously said, what are mandates? You know, what are manifestos? They are only there for during the run-up to the election. After that, who cares about manifestos? And mandates are, you know, people say all kinds of things. We were elected to do this, we were elected to do that, and they will do quite the opposite and also say we were elected to do that. So where there are no checks and balances, then we don't have that contractual agreement which you talked about. I mean, if it's about the voter and the voted, that gets compromised. So in this constitution, given this political culture, I think radical transformations have to occur before we can get that contract in any contract of any significant meaning.
Since we began the conversation on a very theoretical footing, I'd also like to get your thoughts on this concept of participative democracy or the lack thereof in Sri Lanka, because people, the majority of them at least, think that their role in electing a public servant to office is only when it comes to an election. Whereas it's much more than that. Could you elaborate on that aspect?
The politics does not begin, as I've often said, the day Parliament is dissolved, and does not end when the Elections Commissioner announces the results. Same for presidential elections. A citizen's responsibility is much broad, ought to be much broader. But since we're talking participatory democracy, this is a buzzword that came in development also. We talk about participatory development, where you get farmer organizations, for example, and everyone gets a vote. But that the fundamental flaw in that is the assumption that societies are flat. But we operate within structures of power. Those who power get to twist arms. And if you have control of the resources and everything, credit, seeds, everything in a farm organization, and everyone has to submit to that person's will. If it happens in countries, it happens in various small societies, and it also happens globally. The United Nations is an organization where every country is supposed to have one vote. But we know how things happen there. We know about the green rooms that brought the GATT to a close in 1994. So, in a capitalist society with glaring inequities and processes that are legitimate processes to exploit people, keep certain vast number of people out of the decision-making process, keep a large number of people impoverished, and reward a small coterie of people, you're not going to get participation of any kind, of any meaningful kind. But that's a different order of questions that we need to answer. That's something that I don't foresee happening this side of a revolution. But even within this system, we can have, for example, simple example is right to recall. If you can recall those who are not representing us, if there's a mechanism, that is something. If there are mechanisms where we can hold people accountable, that is something. If there are mechanisms to ensure that that there's no corruption, that is something. These things are spoken of, and it's very rhetoric, a lot of rhetoric about these things. We saw how in 2015, this current government, when it came to power with the election of Maithripala Sirisena as president, they brought us these words: Yahapalanaya, good governance, transparency, accountability, so on and so forth. But those terms themselves have got tarnished. I'm being very kind and generous, but we can no longer use them. That's the greatest harm that this government has done to this political discourse, is that we cannot talk about good governance anymore because people laugh, as they should.
Thank you very much, Malinda. Mr. Lasil de Silva, let's start off the conversation where Malinda sort of concluded. The lack of good governance has led to a sort of dissatisfaction of the people across the board. How do we now resurrect this into a positive sort of structure and system?
I think in 2015, actually they came out with the campaign that, what was really lacking in this country was good governance. And to take the country forward, you need, to achieve a lot, in the sense, increase, say, security, and then strengthen all that. After all, to a great extent, without good governance, if there was corruption, all that. So naturally, their problem was, in order to establish, unfortunately, they gave a lot of promises. Having made all the promises, like Malinda said, unfortunately, they could not deliver all that. I believe, if you look at the past, during the last 70 years, if I mean, all what I know during the last couple of decades, I think this was the worst government. So naturally, they could not fulfill the pledges, and it came to a stage. Unfortunately, they also became so very corrupt. Why did they become corrupt? There is a saying, you know, say Lincoln had said, all what is planned is what is going to take place when it comes to politicians. Basically, in my view, though they had given all the promises that they would restore law and order, stop corruption, run ethical governance, because lack of people, you know, politicians with morality and ethics eventually is the biggest problem why we don't have good governance. When it comes to a big problem like what we face now, it has really proved over a period of time, all the successive governments have failed, and they have not looked at the needs and the wants of the masses. As Malin said, the biggest problem, they never had looked into the needs of the masses, or at least to take the country forward. What is really lacking, not only good governance, they also thought, you know, looking at running governance, when it comes to business running governance, look at the parliament. Actually, they have to start everything from parliament. Now, parliament is full of, you know, you can see rogues.
Say the word.
I was, now even Harsha De Silva said, this is a den of thieves. Going further, now in 2015, having made all those promises, I would say it this way, why did they give the pledge that they will even deal with the rogues? And unfortunately, all that was not done. Eventually, we have come back to a situation where they have not delivered what was promised. So,
Right. Thank you very much, Mr. Lasil De Silva. Shamindra, I feel like we're running around in circles. I mean, we've had this program for years, and before this, there's been so many other programs in Sinhala, in Tamil. But every time we're guilty of speaking ill of the current politicians, but we still keep on electing more and more corrupt politicians. In 2020, how must the general public of the country best ensure that it is not taken for a ride once again?
I don't think the electorate has an opportunity to prevent the rogues from coming in.
Okay.
We must understand that situation, because it's up to the General Secretary of the party and the party leadership to pick and fill the people. And even if the electorate rejected certain MPs, they can always come into the parliament through the national list, right? So you have a system, the people are given an opportunity to vote for, then those who are rejected are brought into the parliament. We have about 10 to 15 MPs in parliament who were rejected by the people at the last parliament election. That was in August 2015. Now, if I identify them, now S.P. Disanayake was rejected, Dilan Pereira was rejected, Sunil Handuniti was rejected, Bimal Ratnayake was rejected. Then there were several others. Sarath Fonseca. His case is very special. He contested from the Democratic Party. He was rejected by the people. Then the UMP brought him in on the UMP national list. And there's a court case in respect of that. So I think the whole system is corrupt. Now recently, when I raised a question from the former Justice Minister Vijaydas Rajapaksa, I asked him, what is the most corrupt institution in the country? He said Parliament. Now, as a person who served that institution for 10 years, about 10 years or more than that?
No, I was there for about
30 odd years. But you were the Director General of Administration for about 10 years. And you know, it's the worst place right? The entire system, I mean, the way they run that operation in parliament, they can do anything, right? So when people think of a system good for this country, we must think of the office of the president, the parliament, the provincial council, and the local government. Right? We have to take all these institutions into consideration. Now, we have office of the president, we have one president, 225 members in parliament, 500, almost, I think 455 members in the provincial councils, and over 8,600 members in the local government authorities, taxpayers' money. And what do? They do nothing, right? That's why the television stations, I mean, regularly organize all these talk shows, discussions, because nothing happening in this country, right? Every sector in turmoil. You take the presidential election. Now today, the UMP deputy leader, Sajid Premadasa, and those who support him, they were forced to organize a meeting in Badula today. It was organized by Harin Fernando, minister, because that a very influential section of the party denies Sajid Premadasa the opportunity to contest, right? And he wants to contest. And so there's a huge division within the UMP over that. So I think when you...
But the young membership of the United National Party, as well as a majority of other stakeholders, are pro Sajid Premadasa because he doesn't sort of conform to the ancient guys that we already have seen for so many decades.
This is the third presidential election after the government defeated the LTT. So you must try to compare what happened in 2010 and now. See, in 2010, the UMP did not field a candidate. They fielded
they've had borrowed candidates.
Yes, an outsider, former commander of the army, right? Now, who supported Fonseca? They had the UMP, the JVP, the TNA, and the SLMC. That was in 2010. They failed. 2015, the same group supported Maithripala Sirisena. He won. He's the president now. Right? Now, 2015, the situation is very different. The JVP has declared it will field a candidate, the group of civil society organizations. The TNA is not sure. The TNA is not sure what it's going to do, but I still believe the TNA will stand by the UMP. I still believe. Right? So the UMP is in a hell of a fix. They have a huge problem because they don't have those partners. The partners, those who supported them in 2010 and 2015. So now, coming election, they are forced to reach an agreement with those who supported them, those who contested the last parliamentary election on the UMP ticket. Because the SLMC, then Richard's party, then Patley's party, all these people contested on the UMP ticket at the last election. That's 2015 August. So it's a very interesting situation. I don't know how they are going to come into this agreement. Anyway, last Sunday, the SLPP has declared its candidate, the former Defence Secretary Gotabaya Rajapaksa. And with that, there's another issue now. I don't know how former President and the opposition leader Mahinda Rajapaksa functions as the opposition leader in Parliament while being the leader of the SLPP. So all the political parties, all the groups are facing issues.
So quite a bleak picture that we're looking at right now, according to Mr. Shamindra Ferdinando. Let's get to the questions. Deshan, let's start off with you.
Thank you, Sonali. I want to direct my first question to Mr. Senaviratna. Mr. Senaviratna, I think one of the problems that Mr. De Silva pointed out was institutionalized problems and things of that nature that are holding back the potential growth or the movement forward of this country. Now, we are at a juncture where a presidential election is on the cards, but we have a situation where people are wondering whether the candidates that have been put forward are the best candidates for the job. You have one candidate who has legal issues surrounding him. There are accusations, there are cases that have been filed. You have another candidate whose own party is throwing accusations of his qualifications. Do you not think that at the very least we as a people deserve to have a criteria that needs to be met when it comes to the presidential candidates at the least?
Criteria such as education qualifications or what?
Or at least no court cases, things like corruption accusations.
So, well, we are supposed to think to consider people innocent until proven guilty, and if that is put as a criteria, if you're contesting and I don't want to, I think you're a threat to me being elected, I will throw a court case at you. So we should not take those things. I mean, we have to think about the value that we attach to that kind of thing. But just to, if I may, before I get to that, something add to what Shamindra said, what Sonali's question regarding Sajid Premadasa. Now he's younger, okay, he's not young, but he's younger than Mr. Ranil Wickremesinghe. Whether the youth of the party support him because he's younger or because they want anyone other than Ranil Wickremesinghe is the question that we should ask. But what he's saying is not new. What he's saying is stuff that was said 30, 40 years ago. He does not have any new program. Now, just to add, just to, yeah, but criteria, what we lack, as Shamindra said, is credible candidates. The parties are not giving us credible candidates. So what do? Do we choose the lesser evil as we have for the last 70 years? That's generally what happens in a presidential election. You look at, you don't have a proper candidate, you need to throw people out. So then it's a default option. Now people say that Mahinda Rajapaksa was defeated because we wanted good governance. But perhaps we can entertain the idea that people were sick of Mahinda Rajapaksa. So it was to defeat him that Maitripala, because Maitripala, Sirisena and that coalition also had a history. They have a history which is not very pretty. So today, if Gotabaya Rajapaksa is going to win, it is not necessarily because he has better credentials, but because there is perhaps a perception that this government should be thrown out, right? But why do we tend to look at the two major parties? Why can't we look outside that? Because now when I look at all the possible candidates, now we have Gotabaya Rajapaksa from the SLPP. SLFP has not talked about a candidate so far.
I don't think they will feel a candidate.
Yeah, so Maitripala Sirisena or anyone else from the SLFP, there's no sign that any of them are going to come forward. There's also the UNP will have to put forward a candidate, whether it's a borrowed rent a candidate kind of operation or something, we do not know. But then Gotabaya Rajapaksa has a program. He articulated that pretty well. He has got together a whole bunch of professionals who have been working on policy documents for the last 2 years or more. We can argue about whether they are good or bad, but there's an effort there. United National Party is just talking about promises. There's no policy document that we have seen. As it was mentioned earlier in a pre-show discussion, too many policy documents. We don't know whether they're serious about it. But then now Mr. Lasil de Silva's Mahajana Sabha, they came up with this vision for the country. So they have done their homework. I want someone who has done his or her homework. The National People's Movement, which is also a gathering of professionals and very patriotic people, remarkably they are not part of the so-called civil society, the NGO mafia. They are different brand of people. They are working on policies. The Janata Vimukti Peramuna always comes up with a policy, but they are also tainted for many reasons, which we can talk about if we want. But I think that any election, whether it's a presidential election or generally the parliamentary election, we are given an opportunity to look at these things and talk about these things. And Sonali always asks this, so what are we going to do? Are we going round in circles? We are electing these rogues in and they are electing them out and bringing the earlier rogues back again. But I think time is long. Politics is also long. And I like to think that we learn from our mistakes, Lasil and Shamindra, and we pay more attention to these the movements and organizations and processes that are happening outside the mainstream parties. And maybe we have to take them seriously, empower them in whatever way we can, and in the very least, they will be a kind of a pressure group.
Mr. Senaviratna, just to interrupt, Mr. Ferdinando, you've, like Mr. Senaviratna, you've been in the news industry for a while. Why is it that we don't see a third force come forward? You see the JVP, the Janata Vimukti Peramuna, try to do this for the longest time. You've not seen them being able to muster up the support that they need. Actually, I think at the local government elections last year, they held on to Tissa Maharama before, but they lost that as well. Is there no scope? Is there no scope for a third force in this country, or is it that?
Deshan, I don't like to describe the JVP as the third force, right? The JVP obtained 39 seats in 2004 because the JVP contested on the PA ticket, right? So you contested on the PA ticket and they obtained 39
Mr. Fernando, but moving away from that, what I'm trying to ask you is there are two clear-cut camps here, two major camps. Why is it that?
Because you will never find a third force in this country, never. Because the third force, sometimes people describe the JV as the third force, sometimes the TNA. Both parties work with the major parties. The TNA in 2010 and 2015 work with the UNP. The TNA is still with the UNP. The JVP worked with the PA in 2001, then 2004. So in 2005, the JVP supported Mahinda Rajapaksa to win the election, the president election. So you cannot find a third force in this country. And if you talk about the TNA cooperated with LTT also. So there's no third force. Actually, what had happened is after the local government election, last local government elections, 2018 February, the number one force is the SLPP, Sri Lanka Podujana Peramuna, right? Countrywide elections, standings. Then the UNP, then the SLP. That's the truth, right? So the presidential election, they'll have to prove that they can maintain that standard.
Mr. De Silva, interesting remarks from Mr. Ferdinando. You are very active when it comes to the political sphere at the moment. You're mobilizing civil society. We see you standing up against a lot of what is said in the media, especially by these politicians. You've been more than happy to be vociferous about issues you've seen. What do you think? Do you think that practically speaking, and given the institutionalized problems that exist in the current sphere, that we can realistically see a third force to make their way through come November?
Yes, let me start how I really decided to, get involved in this kind of activities. Now, having been in the public sector for a long period of time, say since early 70s, I saw the destruction that was taking place, right? In my view, 77 election was a turning point. Let me say it this way. Now, we came up with a constitution, and that was a constitution where they gave an undertaking where they wanted a president who is not accountable to or answerable to parliament, right? And we have had so many presidential elections and we have had so many presidents. I think I would like to say that the presidency and this system, and again the destruction of everything, now there is no, I think to a great extent, no law and order. There are, like what Shamindra said, look at parliament, right? Parliament is the place where they should set an example. Unfortunately, the expenses are so high, but people have to bear all the expenses and they carry such a big burden. This is, in Sri Lanka, one of the biggest burdens, And one of the biggest problems is that they run top-heavy government. Over a period of time, like Malinda said, you know, they have only done whatever they want to look after their interests.
Mr. De Silva, but with 3 months left for a presidential election.
Yeah. Now,
very clearly.
That's what I was trying to tell you.
Yeah.
Right? So people, when you go about, we have seen that they are really frustrated. And they know the last occasion when both sides came together, having assured that they will be able to deliver something more, because that was an undertaking given again, like what I told you previously. This is within a very short period. We have to get all that going. And we are, at the moment, in contact with a lot of, you know, similar, with people with similar conceptions, and they really want to change. I know it is not possible because the present government and even the previous government are basically created a situation where the state has failed. People are fully well aware that they will never be able to put the whole country right.
Right.
In a situation where they have no hope, it is the best way. We have a feeling we need good people. Actually, even in our case, my commitment for doing that is basically with a feeling. I think Shamindra knows the story because we have been fighting very hard even when we're in service. Unfortunate situation is everybody who had tried to do something beneficial or who have tried to do something good actually failed, and it is all because they have been all corrupt political whatever system that had been. Please.
Mr. De Silva, so you're talking about good people.
Yeah.
Could you tell us what would you consider to be the hallmarks of what people are looking for a future president of Sri Lanka? What are the...
Yeah, I think you came to the correct point because I really came up today. Now, what are people looking for? Really, now we have had, now this government again, we saw how the systems have failed. Why did it fail? Now, we saw the April 21st, you know, explosions. Ultimately, all of them tried to wash their hands, and they eventually, there is a thing, you know, it flows, actually the IGP or whoever, but everybody is responsible. Let me take you to the Constitution, because now, in my view, the president, the government, will say the cabinet of ministers, all of them will have to do what is right as it is stated in the Constitution. But constitutionally, have they done all that in accordance with the Constitution? Now, as the president will say, you ask me whether we can expect the president, or at least the next president or whoever who is elected, you know, to perform. My argument, my suggestion is there should be a system where, in keeping with the oath they give, that they adhere and they honor the Constitution. Now see, in the Constitution, Article 4B says, the executive power of the people, including the defense of Sri Lanka, shall be exercised by the President of the Republic, elected by the people. When you look at the Constitution, only in regard to the President, everything has been specified, all the duties that needs to be performed by the President are stated there in the Constitution. My argument is, unfortunately, with regard to the Prime Minister, the ministers, all that, right, they have specified duties, but since 1978, up to now, none of the politicians elected by the people have done anything in accordance, or at least in terms of their, say, to do all those duties for the best interest, in the best interest of the country and the people. It has come to a situation now, looking at the big picture, why did they fail? Because they did not resort to, you know, act within the laws, rules, regulations. And having faltered, it has come to a situation, say, they have also failed because
Unfortunately, the people who have robbed, let me say it that way, even they have not been dealt with. Now the Constitution specifically says what is wanted and what is needed. They have not conformed to the Constitution, and Constitution is just a scrap of paper on that basis.
Mr. Seneviratne, this you were talking about an outside force, so apart from the two major parties. Now, the next election, in the backdrop of, we have issues in the economy, we have issues of corruption and mismanagement, there's an energy crisis, you have famine on one, or rather a drought on one side, and then you have rain issues on the other side. And then let's also not forget that there is a security problem situation after what happened in April. That's a very diverse mix of problems. Do you see anybody in the current field of candidates who can propose a solution to these problems? And if I can just follow up with one other thing, how significant do you think these presidential elections are? Or is the general election more important? Is this just a caretaker president who's coming in?
Well, the perception is that people say after the 19th Amendment, whoever becomes president will have much less powers. But constitutions are not written in stone. They can be changed. Imagine a scenario where the next president has a party which wins a majority, governable, working majority in a general election. He or she will have considerable power, to the extent of even amending the constitution. There is a perception that this government is weak, and that is, and apart from being incompetent and corrupt, and a need is there for a strong leader. Right now, strong can be understood in many ways. It can be firm, it can be bullish. So it's a mix. But we need some people who can take serious decisions about things like national security. Whether that is the only issue is a different matter. There are so many other issues which you pointed out. I don't see. I mean, it's not like we can wish for whatever we want. We will have to elect, as Shamindra said, among those who come forward. And so far we have Gotabaya Rajapaksa as one candidate from among the major parties, major 3-4 parties, if you throw in the TNA, the JVP also. No one else, so we can't be like speculating too much. But then we have Mr. Nagananda Kodituakku, who has declared that he is going to contest.
But just to say something, Mr. Kodituakku told me, when I inquired from him, that he held talks with the JVP and the JVP failed him. So Nagananda Kodituakku has no political party to contest.
Right, but there are political parties for hire, as we know, right? And parties can be purchased. Yeah. We don't know how that will happen.
I just asked somebody, the general secretary of a political party, Rajalia, it was called DUNF, he said party, and that he was offered 20 million by a certain interested party.
Right. But anyway, let's we don't know about those things, but let's see what the options we have. Are we going to see the entire future of our country as being something that will be decided in November this year by whoever we elect? I don't think that we should think in, if you think in those terms, like one day someone offered me a cone palais, right, this cone, and he showed me the tree. I said, I can give you a plant, a sapling. I said, how old is this tree, do you think? He said, this is probably about 80 years old. So I told him, I'm not going to see this. He said, don't think of it like that. Someone will, someday. There's a cone where we turn off to my house. Someone would have planted it. It's a beautiful tree. So we have to think of politics from a different scale, with a different perspective, and think of okay. Even the JVP, I believe, when they talk about fielding a candidate, I think the JVP is thinking in terms of the possible of a parliamentary election, of positioning itself. So we have to think like that. But if we don't start at any point, if we wait for the right candidate, it's like waiting for, waiting for Godot, waiting for a hero. When will Zorro come? Zorro will come and, on his horse and sort things. So it doesn't happen like that in real life. We have to work hard. We have to talk about policy. We have to discuss. And there are many groups who are engaging in that process. And I believe that if someone comes forward, we can talk about it. Whether they get elected or not, whether they get 5 votes or 500,000 or 5 million, that's a different matter. But let us not, throw out other options just because they are not electable. If it is a question of winnability, then of course, as things stand, let us stop the discussion and they say, okay, it's Gota, because that's what it seems like.
Thank you very much. On that note, we go in for a short commercial break. We'll be right back. Stay with Face the Nation. Is Sri Lanka waiting for its next hero? We're talking about the 2020 presidential election. We're in conversation with Malinda Seneviratne, Shamindra Ferdinando and Lasil De Silva. Malinda, my first question in this round is to you. Sri Lanka lacks campaign financing laws and regulations, which means that anyone can contest with drug money and all sorts of ill-gotten wealth. Speak to us about how this goes against the very tenets of the values that we try to believe in.
Yeah, just to elaborate on that by way of a preamble, there was a lot of noise about Chinese company, which is part of the Chinese government, state, funding Mahinda Rajapaksa's campaign. We also know that the United States funded Sarath Fonseca's campaign and Maithripala Sirisena's campaign. We know that top business interests frequently contribute to all political parties. They are just covering bases. Now, the problem is one of disclosure. Right? A couple of years ago, when I was talking about contesting the presidential election 2020, I put a post on Facebook saying, I don't mind anyone giving me any money. Only thing is, your name and the amount that you have been given will be made public. So if you gave me money and somewhere down my presidency, if you get awarded some tender or you get a job, then I'm caught, right? So that is the only safeguard that I have, not to be corrupt. And we know that political parties don't even submit the accounts of an election campaign to their own membership. I don't think the United National Party has done that after J.R. Jayawardena died. SLFP has. I don't know whether they have done it after 2010. But we lack proper, well-defined, clear rules and regulations about contributions to party coffers. And that is a huge problem when it comes to accountability, because it feeds the whole corrupt system afterwards. Now you can't, some people say you can't run a campaign, you can't run for office for even a provincial council election without 100 million. Who has 100 million? Who is giving that money? And if someone gives you money, is it because they're loaded with money, or they're expecting something in return at some point down the line? And in that case, it's a bribe. It's a bribe. And if someone who has contributed to your campaign comes and asks you a favor, you can't refuse. That's how it happens. Which is why you need full disclosure. Then one thing that could happen if in a situation like that is no one will have too much money. Even Mr. De Silva and Mr. Ferdinando and I could contest, and who knows, we may even win, because it will be a more even playing field, where no one will be loaded with money, even if they're rich. You can have spending limits also. You can allocate a certain limited amount of TV time, radio time, or whatever. and you know, make it a more accountable, more fair system of electing representatives.
On the same note, there are regulations in place to ensure asset declarations of parliamentarians. However, there's a secrecy clause in the Asset Declarations Act. However, there are several parliamentarians who went ahead and made their asset declarations public. Tharaka Balasuriya, Vasudeva Nanayakkara, M.A. Sumantiran, Vidura Vikramanayaka, Iran Vikramaratna, Ranjan Ramanayaka, Said Ali Maulana, Harsha De Silva, Vimalavira Disanayaka, and Ashu Marasinghe. So these are very positive steps that we see. However, much more needs to be done.
Yeah, we need to know they should declare their assets the time they leave office also. We know how much they have gained in that period. There are certain things like that in place which are positive, but they are not adequate. Obviously, they have to be strengthened, and the holes have to be plugged. The clauses which allow them to slip should be removed, or you know, you fix it. Our system overall, institutional arrangement and the whole process across sectors is full of holes, and the people who are mandated to fix things don't want them fixed. Because,
absolutely, because it doesn't work in their best interest to fix the lacunas.
Which is why we need strong civil society organizations which are not associated with political parties. Now we are civil society, so-called. Essentially, we have 100 civil society organizations that can't bring 100 people for a demonstration, and their political preferences are pretty clear. So if you start affiliating ourselves with candidates and parties and in election time, no one is going to take you seriously, and that gives a bad name to civil society. Civil society is not these 2, 3, 4 organizations, but if we have a strong civil society with integrity, purpose, and a really solid sense of citizenship, then we can help hold people accountable.
All of these are quite lofty goals. Shamindra, speaking of lofty goals, in 2015 January, we saw how there was a resurgence of sorts when the government of Maithripala Sirisena, the coalition government came in, Maithripala Sirisena and Ranil Wickremesinghe subsequently. However, as of now, there seems to be a certain lull in the enthusiasm that was once shown by the people of Sri Lanka, and a certain enthusiasm when Gotabaya Rajapaksa was called in announced as the candidate, as a presidential candidate from the SLPP by most sectors. Do you think that he'd be free of the fear psychosis that he and the government of Mahinda Rajapaksa sort of created when they were in power? Because most people had that fear. This white van culture was being spoken of, corruption was being talked of. What is your take on this?
Sonali, in 2005, Mr. Rajapaksa came into power and there was a war. So, during a conflict, the army had to take certain measures, and they did. And today, people, talk as if there was no LTT, right? All of a sudden, I mean, those who talk about white vans, death squads, all these elements, they must realize we had an enemy. This country fought an enemy which killed a president, a presidential candidate, almost killed President Kumaratunga. Right? There were suicide cadres, they operated in parliament, and there was a time that there was a huge threat on our national security. So just please don't say that there was a culture of fear, that they were operating white vans, right? If the Rajapaksas did something wrong, corruption, whatever, they must be punished. But during the war, we had to fight. We had to fight. Between 1987 and 1990, we always appreciate the action taken by the UNP to destroy the JVP, right? So people, those who talk about Batalanda and death squads and what happened in Matara and Hambantota, they don't talk about the killings carried out by the JVP, right? The JVP almost killed President Jayawardena in Parliament in 1987, August. So you must realize, when people say, talk of Gotabaya Rajapaksa as if that, that if he take power and if he became the president, that there would be death squads and all. There's no basis for that. There's no basis. There's no basis. And I'd like to add something to what Malinda said about campaign financing. We have a system, it's again operated through the parliament, where the campaign funds are made available through the taxpayers' money. That's why they issue duty-free permits to members of parliament and they sell those permits, right? And I'd like to ask you whether those honorable members of parliament who declared their assets, did they sell their permits? Each permit worth 33 million rupees each, the tax exemption. So just imagine, according to Mr. Nagananda Kodituakku, the loss suffered, the revenue loss suffered by the country after the last parliamentary election, rupees 7 billion, right? So all these people who are going behind Gotabaya Rajapaksa, Sajid Premadasa, and all the other candidates, all of them are thinking of the next vehicle permit, right? Because the next parliamentary election will come immediately after the presidential. You must, Sonali, when you discuss this issue, you must know how our system operates. See,
Shamindra, as a senior journalist, could you say that you were satisfied with the level of media freedom that was available during the presidency of Mahinda Rajapaksa?
I condemn President Rajapaksa's government for attacks on Sirasa and other media. That's
right.
No doubt about it.
Thank you very much. Moving on to Mr. Lasil de Silva. You earlier spoke about the role and duties and obligations of a president of the country. But once you put it into practice, should it not be entrenched then in the presidential mandate that a candidate brings forward? How does that work from theory to practice? Can you take us through that process?
Yeah, I like to start with what Shamindra said, right?
Sure.
Now see, this was a country which had to go through 30 years of war. And after we ended the war, basically everything was started, rehabilitation, all that, right? I think we really boast of that there was even national security taken care of, everything was, rosy. But the problem is there were issues where basic requirements have been overlooked. Unfortunately, in this country, what had really gone wrong, we have neglected the basic requirements that needs to be provided to the masses. Say we talk about the, elephants coming into villages and all that, and then lack of educational facilities, all that, and talk about the law and order situation. You can't, we were just discussing earlier just prior to this, that, no one is safe in this country, right? Now, there have been situations in the past, right? We were concerned about lack of security, bombs, explosions all over. Now, in countries like USA in 1776, in Germany and even in Japan, right? After ending the war, all the leaders came together and planned out everything to take the country forward. But according to me, what I feel is, since I was also fairly involved in this kind of things in parliament, right? I saw none of them were genuinely interested in doing something for the benefit of the people, for the benefit of the country. Now see, countries like Rwanda, there millions were killed within a matter of 2 years, right? Actually, now they themselves felt that it was wrong for them to do all that, and now even Rwanda is developing. They have even gone to the extent, you know, the representation of ladies in parliament is about 67%, right? So the whole problem is our leaders did not have policies and principles, and they were basically self-centered. My argument is, my problem, you know, what I'm trying to state here, we have certain basic problems in this country. Now look at electricity, right? People are struggling. The bills are so high, right? That is all because there is corruption. Look at the roads. You waste so much of time, it's wasted on the roads because traffic jams, all that, right?
I'd like to draw your attention back to the question I initially asked you, which was on the election mandate of presidential candidates. How what is enshrined in the Constitution is translated into a mandate which is further practiced once a candidate emerges victorious. We saw how this government came in with its biggest promise to abolish the executive presidency. Speak to us about that.
Yeah, now this government eventually came up with the 19th Amendment, right? Even after the 19th Amendment, they speak about various deficiencies and all that. Actually, with regard to the president, that's what I was trying to explain early part of the, you know, here, that it is only with regard to the president we can specifically state that the president's functions, duties, all that is stipulated here. Now, actually, what is needed, president must set out his role, specifically when it comes to, we'll start appointments of secretaries, cabinet ministers, all that. Now, unfortunate situation is when you have to appoint secretaries under 52(2), it specifically says the president has the authority. Now, my suggestion here, president must conform to certain ethical and moral standards there. He should not appoint anyone just to satisfy the minister, because that eventually had destroyed the public sector totally. It had politicized the whole system. Therefore, my suggestion here, you know, they should frame, at least they should set out guidelines as to what should be done for the benefit, and in future how they should do all that. Let me talk about this presidential pardon, another thing, right, which have been a very controversial issue that have been debated. Those duties like presidential pardon, appointments of public officials, judges, all that, that should be done without any political whatever agenda. It should be done in the interest of the country, for the benefit of the people, without, now during the last government, Mr. Milroy Fernando's wife, who was sentenced to death, jail for,
long time,
yeah, I think life sentence, really?
I'm not sure.
Yeah, it was a life sentence, right? Unfortunately, it was converted to, she was granted presidential pardon on Women's International Day. Then again, recently there was another issue, Warakapola Pradesh Sabha president, chairman, was taken in for, and sentenced to jail for 16 years or so, and he was also granted. Now look at this issue. One was a murder, the other was a case where he had accepted a bribe of 25,000 rupees. So these are bad examples. You know, the presidents in this country should set an example
they should not resort to anything irregular or anything improper. If they can really frame guidelines as to how those duties should be performed, I believe things could definitely be better. There's a situation where even with regard to the appointments of, all the other judges, all that, there is severe criticism. The biggest thing what they could do is they must come out with similar rules, regulations, because what we had inherited from Britain just after independence, we were able to we were really proud of our public service. How did they destroy? They destroyed all that, unfortunately, because they don't follow the rules and they have no guidelines as to how it should be done. My feeling is, if you really set out the guidelines to be followed by the president with regard to anything, appointments, all that, I think things would fall in place.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lasil De Silva. 14 years ago today, Sri Lanka lost one of its most celebrated foreign ministers, Lakshman Kadiragama, who famously once said, "Democracy is vulnerable. It is fundamentally constrained, limited by the demands of democratic practice and tradition. A democracy, even at a time of war, has to remember the rule of law, the freedom of the press, and all those requisites of a practicing democracy." It is indeed these ideals and these values that we try to keep instilled in society, in those that purport to govern us. Without any further ado, I'd like to get Shehan, your input on our panelists.
I just had to come back to something that you said earlier, Shamindra. You were talking about and looking at the current interpolitics, between parties and all that, and alliances. You said that there is no third force in Sri Lankan politics. You got the blue, you got the green. Now you have the green and SLPP. But is that perhaps why there are some who are convinced that the SLFP can make the difference as to who wins? What do you think about this? How significant a role do you think the SLFP is going to play in these elections?
I don't think they have a significant role to play in this election, in the coming election. People have decided already, because at the last local government election, the SLFP polled about 4%. As the UPFA, they polled about 14%. So I don't think it can make a difference this time.
So you think that people have completely switched from blue to the color represented by the SLPP?
There's no doubt about it, because you take the UPFA parliamentary group, I think about 70 people are with SLPP, about 70. And the SLFP, of the people they have, I think about 10 to 12 are defeated candidates appointed on the national list, right? So they are in a very difficult situation.
Mr. Senaviratna, but I want to move to you. I want to ask you this question now. Something that has been on the lips of the General Secretary of the SLFP, Dasri Jayasekara, has been අපි වුණාතුව කාටවත් ආණ්ඩුවක් හදන්න බෑ. He says that they have the තීරක බලය. Do you think this is the case? Sorry?
Yeah, the remote.
Do you think this is the case? Because if you do the math, roughly, an average citizen, if they do the math, if they look at the provincial local government election last year, with the SLFP and the SLPP coming together, I think even MP Anuradha Jayaratna mentioned that in Kandy they have recorded their highest total. Do you see practically anybody who is trying to take over the presidency being able to do it without the SLFP support?
See, I think that, Deshan, the arithmetic works differently from a local government election to a presidential election. It's very different. But if you compare the 2015 January situation and 2019 August situation, let's say, the anti-Rajapaksa forces in 2015 and 2019, today they don't have the JVP, right? JVP is not with that, with the group that supported the Maithripala Sirisena as candidates. there's no Maduluave Somahamduru. There's
Sobita Hamduru.
So Maduluave Sobita Hamduru, sorry. No civil society. I mean, all these Purasi Balaya, all those things they have basically closed shop. The Tamil vote base is compromised. The Muslim vote base probably is intact on that side, but given the Easter Sunday attacks and the behavior of some of the leaders of the Muslim parties, if the Muslim parties accommodate on the United National Party candidates stage, that could worry voters of other communities, right? We don't know how they will, you can't predict all these things. Then the Catholic vote is compromised, right? And Maitripala Sirisena does not have a vote base anymore, right? If he's not even contesting, why should anyone vote for the United National Party? Why should any SLFP vote for the United National Party candidate? See, they might vote for an independent candidate if they don't want to vote for Gotabaya Rajapaksa, right?
Yeah.
But the Mahinda Rajapaksa faction, people say Maitripala won because of the Tamil vote. But that is not true, because the number of votes that Maitripala Sirisena got from the north and east in 2015 was identical to what Sarath Fonseca polled in 2010. So there was no gain there.
Proportionally, it was the same.
It was the same. So because there was like more voters involved. But Mahinda Rajapaksa's decline in 2010 to 2015 was not from from those areas, but from the other districts. He lost a lot of votes in the western province. Now, are those people going to vote for the Yahapalanists, whatever form they come today after the track record of the last 4 years? I doubt it. I doubt it. So, whatever votes that came to Maitripala Sirisena won't go to whoever is contesting. So, you are asking whether the SLFP will have this Tiraka Bale, right? So, if the SLFP representatives, elected representatives, are with Gotabaya Rajapaksa at this point, that 15% or 14% or how many they got in that number, if you take that as a rough estimate.
As the SLFP, they had only 4% as SLFP.
Yeah, so it's the JVP also has a certain number of votes, I mean vote base, 300, 400, 500,000 votes. They are not going to, they may not go to Gotabaya Rajapaksa. I mean, they won't go to that other camp.
Mr. De Silva, I want to ask you now, do you see that the potential third forces or the potential alternate forces that are in consideration when it comes to this election, be it Rohan Pallewatta, be it Nagananda Kodituwaku, even be it the JVP or any other civil society movement, do you see that the breakaway of the votes from these main two camps will be strong enough to propel an outsider to the presidency?
Yeah, now see, the last local government elections, actually I personally feel there was also a total, number of people who voted in anger against the government, just to a protest kind of a vote, So naturally, at the moment, there is some feeling like that when it comes to all the parties, because they have been there all throughout and they have ultimately dragged this country to this level. We are in conversation with a lot of people, a lot of, say, groups. I personally feel every one of them, especially youth, they are really keen that they should make a change. Now, in our case, I mean, we are trying so much not for our personal gain, basically, because we are trying to do it that way, knowing that they want a different set of people with morality, ethics, and I would say who could create an egalitarian type of a society. It is, at the moment, all that is not there.
Mr. De Silva, do you see, politically speaking, that, like Mr. Senaviratne was saying, there will be people who are disgusted with both the Rajapaksa faction and even the current government. Do you see that that breakaway faction is strong enough to propel a third force or an alternate candidate to the presidency?
Now, we are in touch with number of groups, and there are very strong personalities, I am telling you, who will definitely be able to give a good run. I personally believe they go on the basis of their track record, all that, right? Eventually, the government, you know, even the previous government, all of them, I don't want to say they have destroyed their reputation. You know, they have, I don't think there's recognition for them. Unfortunately, you know, the people, they say they want all the 225 in parliament. Actually, that is the common feeling of all the people. And similarly, we are also committed to, I mean, in my own way, I'm not a good orator, I'm not a good, you know, all that.
Mr. De Silva, you personally,
can get things organized or whatever.
You personally, you're part of one such movement, correct?
Yeah.
As an individual who values transparency and who values decency, ethics, etc., can you make a commitment on this program that the movement you support will be absolutely transparent with their funding?
Within a very short period of time.
Can you make a commitment that they will be transparent with their funding?
Very, I am positive we are not going to do anything. Actually, we will say what we do because we have a track record.
So, but the transparency will be there with who's behind the movement.
We will honor the constitution, we will honor the laws, we will respect democracy. We really want, you know, this country strengthened because we have seen what had gone wrong over a period of time. The biggest problem is, unfortunately, good people have no place in the present system. So we have to bring good people, not to go with them in a different camp. That will be the third force eventually. I have a feeling we should make
Mr. Ferdinando, maybe you can offer these good people some column inches, you know.
All these, I mean, opinions are good, but when you think of the parliament, the president, whoever wins the presidency, is elected by a set of corrupt people. That is the truth. A person, now see, SLPP or UNP or any political party, the leader is elected by a set of thieves, right? So that is the whole problem. Now see, you take Maithripala Sirisena's presidency. What went wrong? He was elected by a group of people. That group comprised the UNP, JVP, TNA and the SLMC. And the president had no option but to appease all these people. That's why Mr. Sirisena appointed Singaporean Arjuna Mahendran as the governor of the central bank.
No,
that is the whole issue.
That was again a pre-planned thing. You know, if you go into the history.
No, but at the end of the day, President Sirisena appointed Arjuna Mahendran as the governor of the central bank.
But
he appointed.
I mean, I'm not trying to.
And he issued a photograph also.
If I were to interject to the question, even under the best of circumstances, the Janata Vimukti Peramuna could not even get 5% of the vote. We are talking about, you know, we're talking about electability and all this thing. I believe that with all the 70 years of disgust that we have about that 70 years and who has been ruling us, throwing in a kind of tendency to go for the default option, getting the guys in power out, looking for the lesser evil and so on, and winnability. It is very unlikely that for all the positive things, attributes that a third party candidate can have, realistically, I don't think that such a person can get more than 10% of the vote. But I believe that a very strong showing in a presidential election will create a platform for everyone to think in a bit in a different way for the future. That is the maximum that I can think of, because we know how we can look at the voting patterns. We know how people are disgusted with all these political parties that are, as they say, antimata kochchara bannat satata gahala enawa. Right? No. Things like that. Yeah. So when you talk about the kind of leader that we ought to have in terms of appointing people, enlightened, ethical, humble, person of integrity. That is an ideal which we should not abandon. We should strive for. Now, we have this fear psychosis that Sonali talked about the white vans and so on. But don't forget, we also had tire sayers, right? We have a government which was formed by two parties, with the participation of two parties, United National Party and the Janata Vimukti Peramuna. They are responsible for over 60,000 deaths. You know, if for each Tajuddin, there were 10,000 Tajuddins in 88, 89. For each Eknaligoda, there were 10,000 Eknaligodas in there. So if we are talking about the past, we talk about these people were there. It's not like some old people who did that and they are all dead and gone. Ranil Wickremesinghe was there, Tilvin Silva was there. All these people belong to, adhere to, and never apologized. Never said we were wrong. They are all there. So if we are to be fearful, we have to be fearful of this whole bunch.
Definitely.
And then consider Mr. Lasil de Silva's option. If we are going to be really honest about this thing, or if we are just being rhetorical, then it's very easy. We can pass the buck, point fingers and so on. But if we are really serious, those who were blaming, I told my father, he was talking about voting for Sarath Fonseca or Maithripala Sirisena against Mahinda Rajapaksa, and he was talking about corruption and wrongdoing. I said, well, in that case, there's UB Vijayakon you could consider, right, in 2015. He was the only honorable person in that set. But we didn't vote for him, did we?
And also, add a few more. Now, we are fully well aware that we need a change and we need to bring in good people, because if you really bring in good people, you can definitely make this change and turn the country around. Now, for that, I like to say there are quite a large group of people, now clergy, you know, from all kinds of, say, Catholic, Buddhists. Now, all of them have assured that they will give us support to ensure that a good group of people are elected to parliament, so that they will definitely do everything in order to...
about the parliament elections?
No, not only parliament. Now the first thing is the presidential elections, right?
And we have a candidate?
Yeah, we have about a list of 10 people, right? And very good names, I would say. Eventually, within the next couple of days, we might be able to probably announce, but we are also not going to do it that way. And we need to be very careful, because we don't have money like both UNP or the SLPP or the SLFP.
Or the JVP.
Or the JVP, right? This,
Mr. Seniratne, if I can just butt in there. Yesterday, the US Acting Assistant Secretary of State for South and Central Asian Affairs, as well as the US Ambassador to Sri Lanka, they met with Mahinda Rajapaksa just before the SLPP convention. What was that about, do you think?
You should ask that from either Alice Wells, I think, right?
Yes.
Or Aliana.
Actually, no, I believe it was...
or Mahinda Rajapaksa. They would know what that was all about. But if you want to give a kind of reading of the symptoms, why did the US ambassador write to Maithripala Sirisena and ask him to urge the cabinet to finalize the SOFA, AXA and the Millennium Challenge Compact deals? Why did she do that? She did that. Now I'm just trying to give a reading of this, right, which could be plausible. She sends this letter after Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe assured the Bar Association that none of these agreements will be signed this year. So why couldn't she wait for January? Why is she trying to get it done now? Because I believe they have done their homework, they have their intelligence. I believe they are convinced that this government will not be in power come January 2019. About responsibility, since you mentioned Ranil Wickremesinghe, to be fair, he said the government is responsible for the Easter Sunday security lapse that led to the Easter Sunday attack. So now, if we take that as the possible reason for Aliana Teplis to go to write to Maithripala Sirisena, then it makes perfect sense for her to go to the person or the group. He's the leader, Mahinda Rajapaksa is the leader of the SLPP now. He was going to be made the leader just before these people met him, who are likely to form the next government.
So, Mr. Ferdinand, can I get your reading on this situation? Because you have, I mean, you have the US, you have China, and then there's Sri Lanka in between. And you talk about.
I totally agree with him, and I'd like to add that we have already signed AXA. See, the UNP blames President Sirisena for everything except one. The UNP does not blame President Sirisena for signing AXA because it was President Sirisena who submitted AXA in August 2017, and we signed it. It was signed by the Defense Secretary. The Defense Secretary appointed by him, right? So,
but they are looking for an enhancement of that.
No. They have already signed it. It was first signed by Mr. Gotabaya Rajapaksa in 2007 for a period of 10 years. It lapsed, and now it was signed by the Defense Secretary on the orders of the President.
So, Malinda, interestingly, you spoke about how how history repeats itself. As a tribute to one of Sri Lanka's most celebrated poets who played a significant role in placing Sri Lankan English literature on the map, G. Narasanayakam recently passed away. It's very similar in Apocalypse 83. She says, they have destroyed themselves, yet do not know it, waiting for the next call to stream into the streets with burning brands and bombs and clubs and poles. They make their gleeful beds on carnage. What chance, what hope when all is wrecked? On this note, I'd like to ask you, Malinda, how do we ensure that we don't let history repeat itself in terms of the racial and ethnic issues that this country suffered through for so many decades?
Jane Arasanagam, I love very much, lovely lady. I don't know who she meant. I have never asked her when she meant they. But we know who was behind the 83 riots. It was the JSS, the Jatika Sevaka Sangamaya, which is the trade union arm of the United National Party, Cyril Matthews' people, right? And that crime was blamed on the entire Sinhala Buddhist population of this country. I believe that if history is not to repeat itself, it takes a very brave, courageous and determined citizenry who will be able to make the distinction between a terrorist and the community that terrorist belongs to or operates in the name of. All Muslims are not jihadists. All Tamils are not LTTs. We're not. And that conflation, interestingly, was blamed on the Sinhala Buddhists for conflating these two, but it was the civil society that did that by saying the LTT is the sole representative of the timing. But we have to do our utmost. We talk about the tragedy of 1983. Various accounts, various numbers are thrown around. The most from 400 to 4,000 or something like that. But the tragedy is that we couldn't save everyone. We saved thousands. We prevented what we could. We had to watch what we could not stop. But I believe that since 1983, even the attacks that took place after the Easter Sunday attacks were politicians operating, right? That does not mean that on its own steam communities don't get violent, but to stop them, Ordinary people must stand up and say, you know, because if we do not, it snowballs into something that we cannot control but will affect our lives. We didn't want 1983, whoever did that. In the end, what did we have to? We had to suffer checkpoints, we had to suffer suicide attacks, we had to suffer a whole bunch of things. I think we are much better than that in terms of looking at communities and not conflating extremists with the communities they belong to, or as I said, the communities in whose name they fight. So it's never easy, you know. In India, every 20 years you get you know, tens of thousands of people getting killed. In the United States, this year alone, 285 mass shootings. There are certain things that can be done. In Canada, that doesn't happen. Canada has gun control. USA doesn't. So we can have laws which are you know, adhered to the last letter. We have law enforcement authorities that act with professionalism, and we have an enlightened citizenry that support all such efforts. When the Digana incidents happen, if the government and every political party stood up and said, let the law enforcement agencies sort this out, keep out of it. You're not doing anyone any favors by getting involved and trying to be the policeman. We don't want America to police the world. We should not police our own communities in that way. So it takes a lot of things that I believe, Sonali, that have to come together to prevent that kind of thing. I hope we are not at the end, but I want to speak again.
We're going for the short commercial break. We'll be back with the final round, Malinder. You'll have the final say. Stay with us. Welcome back to the final round of Face the Nation. Why are we bad at picking good leaders? Is a question on most people's minds. And how do you select a leader to govern the country? Mr. Lassel de Silva, I was doing some reading on what constitutes a good leader. And some of the reading brought me to the points of integrity, empathy, emotional intelligence, vision, judgment, courage, passion. Where in the world do we find leaders with these attributes and qualities to govern Sri Lanka?
Yeah, but you know, in Sri Lanka, it does not mean that we don't have such people, right? Now, ours is a country where we have a Buddhist culture. Naturally, like we have also examples where we have had good kings, in the sense, who have ruled this country in order to make the people ultimately happy and contented, right? Say that is within those limits. But I'm trying to say, do we have that kind of leaders? Yeah, we have that kind of leaders.
Why are they not emerging?
No,
why are we not voting for them?
They have not been permitted to emerge.
Right. How do we change the system to make sure that they have a way of emerging?
No, actually now see the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, right? Now that was always what they did was to cater to their needs. They showed a different picture and got the laws amended, and they said to bring good people, because normally good people have no money to contest elections, and they said, okay, to pave the path, and created the nationalist, right? But ultimately they brought the wrong type of people. What I'm trying to say now, you have good people, but they are not in the main political stream. This is why we are struggling so hard, going from place to place, talking to people. And we have good people. We have people who can lead. We have people who are good, honest, and who have not resorted to unethical, immoral practices.
Yeah, but what's the point of having such good leaders if we're being governed by a bunch of hooligans?
Yeah, you know, how did the hooligans come to the top? Because that was the way how the rulers and the leaders eventually
permitted. They brought in only hooligans, right? They never brought in good people. Time has come now for a group of people somehow to gather and bring all of them under one umbrella. Those,
Yes.
yeah.
If you could advise our presidential candidates from the various parties, there's Gotabaya Rajapaksa as of now from the SLPP. We are yet to be informed of the official UNP nomination and the JVP nomination and the SLFP nomination, if any. What would you tell these presidential candidates? I mean, we're on to the last few minutes of this show.
Yeah, now see what a lot of problems they had to elect somebody from within the party, and they had no way to pick somebody who is good because they know none of them will be accepted by the masses. Our need is to fill the gap. We really want to find someone who is accepted in every way, who has the requisite qualifications to take the country, you know, pilot the system to the right destination. Because unfortunate situation is, let me say it this way, we never had good leaders since independence. We had no people like Lee Kuan Yew or Mahathir Mohamad. Now in 1948, you know, there had been a situation, they had predicted that this country will take off. We were doing so very well. Unfortunately, no good leaders were there to take it and help the people to...
But let's try to push aside the bleakness for a moment. And if you could, as a senior retired government servant who has served in the parliament as well as the presidential commission, what advice would you give the presidential candidates?
Yeah, you know, the next presidential candidate should be able to understand basically the duties, you know, stated, specified in the Constitution, and lead the country, because even now, even after the 19th Amendment, he is still the CEO. He is the head of the government, head of the state, you know, chief of the armed, you know, commander of the armed forces, and he's the one who appoints the ministers. He's the one. Unfortunate situation is he should not be a man who is from the political kind of system, and he should be a non-political good CEO who could definitely lead this country, who will not get involved in corruption, who will not do anything improper, who will, you know, set an example. Because as the leader, if he could set an example, I believe that kind of a leader who is good, I think we should elect for the presidency.
Thank you very much, Mr. De Silva. Mr. Shamindra Ferdinando.
I think we should not totally believe in people, I mean leaders. We should have strong systems.
Absolutely.
Strong systems to ensure our leaders do not, you know, engage in corruption and destroy this country.
So strengthen the existing systems, is that
yes,
what you're saying?
and
right.
it must, there must be some sort of consensus among political parties already represented in parliament to change the system, to ensure that, to take constitutional measures to ensure the defeated candidates are not accommodated in parliament under any circumstances. Once you are elected from a political party, you cannot change sides, you cannot switch sides, and the president has no power to pardon a person found guilty by the courts. Right? Those are the things we need. We don't need strong leaders. We need strong systems.
Right.
When we have strong systems, automatically we'll see, the people will realize that this country is a better place. Very strong systems. Because the civils, you know, if you take the what is happening in this country now, people have no faith in the civil society. The civil society is funded by foreign powers, right? I can mention one person Dr. Kumar Rupasinghe, the Norwegian government announced that during 3 years, he received $6 million US. 6 million within 3 years. One person, I can mention all the other names if you want to, right? So
Mr. Ferdinando, just to remind you that you must
take
take
full responsibility. I have the
for
document.
statements you make.
So, we must have strong systems now. After the last parliamentary election, I think in 2016, the U.S. State Department announced that the U.S. provided funds to Sri Lanka, Nigeria, and Burma to change the government. Right? It was an official statement. So I think we must go for strong systems to ensure our leaders, all political parties, do not engage in corruption.
Thank you very much. Malinda Seniviratne, you wanted the last word. Now's your chance.
I didn't want the last word. I wanted another word.
Go for it.
Since it's the last word, I'll try to make the maximum use of that. Now, I agree with Chamindra about systems. And the problem with our situation now is the people who are mandated to change the system, who have the power to change the system, are not interested in changing the system, making it better, which is why in the long run we should empower, I would empower, do whatever I can to support people like Mr. De Silva and all the things. Now, the question you asked was what kind of advice would I give a presidential candidate? You mentioned Gotabaya Rajapaksa and you mentioned 2 other political parties who have not yet, we have question marks regarding who the candidate is. But there are questions that I would ask them. And in answering them, they might help me decide whether to vote for them or not. What do you have to say about UNHRC Resolution 30/1? What do you have to say about the disastrous model of development that has threatened life on Earth and the Earth itself? We are still taking the same route of destructive the mode of development which the West itself has abandoned. They have come to a point where they are talking about the happiness index which we had, which they vilified, saying that this is old stuff, right? What do you have to say about chemical-free agriculture? Do you have a time frame for such a situation? What do you have to say about renewable energy? Do you have a time frame for that? What do you have to say about the separation of state and religion? And if so, will you act to create a one country, one law situation where there are no Sharia laws, where there are no Kandyan marriage laws, where there are no Desabalame laws? What do you have to say about the Muslim Marriage and Divorce Act? What do you have to say about revamping the public service? What do you have to say about sovereignty? Sovereignty in this sense, it does not matter whether we are a pawn of China or America or India. What matters, the identity of the people dictating terms to us doesn't matter. What matters is the fact of being dictated to. What is your notion of sovereignty, and in the larger sense, the security and well-being of our population, if you cannot keep this country free from the interference and the dependency that we have of these kinds of world powers. We must have good relations with India, because it's our only neighbor, right? How do you have good relations with India and also not submit to India's dictates? These are the kinds of issues that I want to hear from Gotabaya Rajapaksa, since he is the only person. These are the things that I want your candidate to address when he or she is named.
I like to add one sentence. You know, Ambedkar had said, now we were talking about the systems, right? If you have the best of constitution, if it is handled by immoral, unethical people, you will not get the best outcome. But if you have the worst constitution, if you have moral, ethical people, you will see the best of results. So the problem is not the system, basically, it's the people who handle all that.
Thank you very much for your thoughts and perspectives, gentlemen. Thank you also to our journalists, Deshan Gonawala and Shehan Ranatunga. We were joined by Malinda Seniviratne, Mr. Lasil De Silva and Shamindra Ferdinando, enriching this discussion on what exactly we need to look forward to when electing a president of Sri Lanka, the next president. We're looking at several candidates. Only one has been announced as of yet. The Sri Lanka Podujana Party has announced Gotabaya Rajapaksa as its presidential candidate. We're awaiting the official United National Party stance on who its candidate will be. The JVP, the Janata Vimukti Peramana, is to announce its presidential candidate on the 18th of this month. No word yet on the SLFP, the Sri Lanka Freedom Party. And we are yet to be notified about which presidential candidates the minority parties will be aligning themselves with. You have the Tamil National Alliance, Sri Lanka Muslim Congress, and multiple other parties. Thank you very much to our fantastic viewers for sending across all those questions and for being a part of the show. It was fantastic hosting this. Thank you and good night.